All right, can you guys see the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Yes.
Perfect. Last month I did the whole thing without a PowerPoint, so. All right, thank you for joining us for today's South Dakota Project First Line office hours for the month of June. I am Jess Stanko. I will be hosting the call today. However, we do have a new face on that will be joining us during these office hours calls. Would you like to introduce yourself, Rebecca?
Hi, I'm Rebecca Syme. I am a nurse. I have a background in surgical services, both in the operating room and in SPD, as well as some dialysis, long-term care, emergency department, and others. And I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. We're excited to have you on our team and to get you up and running with stuff. The other face that's on our call today that you guys might be familiar with is Sherry. Sherry, do you want to quick do an introduction too? She'll be joining us going forward for these office hour calls.
Sure. I'm Sherry Fast, been a nurse a long time. Been working with Project First Line since its inception and now doing some HAI work and proactive ICARs and outbreaks. So happy to join too.
Awesome. So Sherry will be joining Rebecca and I on these calls. We're going to change the format of these just a little bit. We still will do the traditional Project First Line education and talk about one of our posters each month. But then in addition to that, we're going to share about some of the things that you can look for in your facilities. We travel around together as a team and do proactive ICARs. So we find common themes. So we just want everybody to be able to start to recognize these risks and think about things that you can do to start to implement at your facility so you are not faced with these issues once a surveyor comes. So for those of you that aren't familiar with Project First Line, it is a CDC initiative that came out of the wake of COVID as a need to get immediate infection control education out to the healthcare workers. We work with the CDC and also the South Dakota Department of Health in the work that we do. Here on your screen now are some of the posters that the CDC has developed to help share education throughout your facilities. This is just one of the resources on their website. There are also many great games, there's interactive activities, PowerPoints, educational resources, all sorts of things that you can utilize for education. So this month, our topic is germs that live on devices. So where is the risk in that, especially in those healthcare facilities? When a device, so something like a pulse oximeter or blood pressure cuff, is used on a patient's body to provide care, those germs on the devices really can spread to those places on a patient's body. And then they become especially susceptible when there's a break in the defense. So maybe a cut in the skin, or you're bypassing some of the measures and like doing a thermometer in the mouth, those type of things. When a device is put into a patient's body, so something like an IV needle, the endoscope, maybe like a surgery for an artificial hip, they can spread really throughout the body. If it's not handled correctly, the shared medical devices can then spread germs from one patient to the next. We do know that many of our patients have highly contagious illnesses, and when we have patients with weakened immune systems, their susceptibility to not being able to fight off additional illnesses and germs really becomes a heightened concern. So talk about some of the germs that live on devices. Keep in mind there's many that can live on devices. These are just some very common ones. Staphylococcus aureus, or staph, which we commonly refer to. That does include the MRSA or the MRSA. Streptococcus is that strep. Candida, that includes Candida auris. Is that right, Sherry?
That's right. Yep.
That is an emerging threat that the United States is really beginning to be introduced to. So something that we need to have heightened awareness of and be alert to. And then there's the bacteria that is in the gut that also could spread on those devices. So things like E. coli, Klebsiella, and C. diff, which is a huge concern, as we know, for especially long-term care facilities, but really any healthcare facility. There are many healthcare tasks that involve devices, whether it's doing something as simple as a vitals check to doing IVs where you're starting and puncturing the skin, so bypassing that defense, or those surgeries and procedures such as a colonoscopy or scopes, where you're really bypassing the defenses and inserting something into patients' bodies. So what are some infection control actions to reduce risk? You know, the number one thing I'm going to talk about is hand hygiene, because that is huge in every instance of healthcare, and it even becomes more important here. Cleaning and disinfection is at the height of these cleaning devices to eliminate the bacteria and the germs. Another opportunity to reduce the risk is device sterilization. So really making sure that the proper processes are followed for sterilization of devices, especially when we're talking about scopes or surgeries where your patients are really at an increased risk due to bypassing those defenses that I've talked about multiple times. And then there's the use of personal protective equipment. So things like gloves become a huge opportunity for preventing infections. All right, so that is just one of the posters from our Project First Line resources that are available to you. All that information that I just talked about is located on one poster that you could easily hang up throughout your facility. With that being said, our office hours always consist of an opportunity to talk back and forth, to ask questions, and discuss any concerns or things where you might be looking for resources for. So at this point, I'm going to open it up to everybody that would like to come off mute and let me know if you have any questions or any topics you'd like to talk about.
So Jess, one of the things that I always ask when we do our proactive ICARs is I try to get people thinking about what they can do. And one of the things I talk about is, what do you do when the call light jumps or falls on the floor? Do you wipe it off? Do you give it back to the resident or the patient without even thinking about it? And, you know, I've been a nurse a long time, and of course, that's what you do. You don't even think about that. And so I think in the past, there hasn't been a lot of research and studies in how dirty floors can play a part in infection control, because we typically don't think our hands touch the floor, which they hopefully don't too often. But I was doing some research, and there is beginning to be more research and studies on how that floor plays a role in pathogen transmission. And think about, like I said, the call light that falls on the floor, and then you give it back to the patient. You lay it on his bed, you put it in his hand, and then he touches his mouth or rubs his nose or something like that. Or even the healthcare provider then touches the call light or the light switch, whatever that might be, as far as tasks. So, and I also think about, last night I was laying in bed thinking about this. Think of our residents that have those non-slip foot slippers on. And I think about they're walking through our facilities, and then we put them into bed, and that's just a huge area where germs could get transmitted. And so I think we need to really be aware of that. You know,
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, C. diff is one of those important germs or spores. It's a spore that actually it lives outside of the body. And so when the C. diff germ lives outside the body, it becomes a spore. And a spore we can inhale, we can ingest, we can swallow. And that's when it becomes a problem, because it gets in our GI tract. And so, yeah, germs live on the floor. Where else you're going to get stool and feces is on the floor.
Exactly.
So,
when you talk about the floor too, some other common areas when we're touring facilities that we see is things to think about is like the oxygen tubing, especially for your residents that have a lot of extension tubing so they can get up and move around the facility on their own. Are you guys wiping that down? Or when they take nasal cannulas off, are those being stored up and away from the floor? So the longer part of the tubing, once they put it back on and it hangs down the front of their clothing, is essentially probably contaminated if it's not being stored properly. So is that getting wiped down before you put a nasal cannula back on your residents or patients? My other thought is something that's huge. I think of it from the hospital side, and also I've seen it in the long-term care, but we all have phone chargers now. And what happens when you unplug your device? It inevitably drops to the floor. So is that getting wiped off when you are handing that back to a resident or patient in your facilities? Thanks for sharing, Sherry.
Yeah, I remember one study, and I'll have to go back and see if I can find where I found it, but it said that those particles can be redispersed even by walking. Walking was like 3 times higher to get those spores
It
back
depends
and
if you have
reactivated.
witnesses or not. And you leave a body.
Susan, can you, there you go. So walking can redisperse those particles in the air. And again, you ingest them, you swallow them. So just think about those kinds of things, I guess.
Anybody else have any questions or thoughts they would like to add? One other thing that we're commonly seeing, just as I talked about, you know, something as simple as a germ on a device is the vitals machine. We need to recognize that the lower parts of those vitals machines, where the feet are, the wheels, that also needs to be wiped down and cleaned on a routine basis. That's something that we're seeing is frequently being missed. So look at yours at your facilities, go back and see, are these on somebody's cleaning schedule? Is it supposed to be the nursing staff that's doing it? Is it EVS that's responsible for wiping down the bottoms of the vital machines that we're taking in and out of patient and residence rooms? That's somewhere that we're seeing a common missed opportunity for infection control and cleaning and disinfection purposes. So if
Also,
oh,
yeah,
go ahead.
also those oxygen concentrators that are in the rooms, they just need to be wiped down.
Absolutely. That concentrator is pulling in air from the room, and any of the areas that are dirty, especially around the filter, is an opportunity for your residents and patients to inhale what's not cleaned off of those. All right. If anybody else have any questions, otherwise we'll wrap up for this month. And like I said, next month will be a little bit different format. We'll share some pictures and then really discuss, kind of like we did today, some of the findings and things you can go back to your facility and look for. If you have other staff that are involved in infection control that you want to join, please forward this meeting on to them so they can join us too. We think it's going to be a really good opportunity each month to look at a new topic and things that are being consistently found across the state. So you can go to in your facility and look for your opportunities to get that taken care of and improved. All right. Like I said, we will wrap it up for today. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to having you next month.